Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm honored to be a part of STEMIEFest 2024, and I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a moment. I'm really excited to talk about this particular topic with you today, designing predictable routines in early childhood environments. And I'm there with you live today. I'll be in the chat. So I do want to let you know before we get started that I would love it to see your thoughts and to collaborate with you in the chat today. I'd love you to share your ideas or ask your questions or make connections, and I'll be there live with you during this entire presentation. And I also wanted to let you know that there is, you'll hear about my personal connection to this topic in a second, but I've put a flower on this first slide today because it reminds me of one of my most favorite quotes about high quality inclusion in early childhood. And that's a quote by Alexander Denaire. And that quote is, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower." And what we've learned in our research and in our partnerships with providers and programs, and also in our work as providers ourselves and administrators, is that routines are a fundamental way to universally design children's environments to promote not only their inclusion, but also their belonging. And as I introduce myself right here, I would invite you to also introduce yourself in the chat. I would love for you to let me know your name and where you are and what your personal connection to inclusion is. And if you do work directly with young children in any way within our early childhood workforce, if you could also share that or your role in what you do, it would be great because I can learn a little bit about you and maybe offer some additional examples in the chat as we move through the presentation today as well. So I'm Jackie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman and I have brown hair that touches my shoulders. And today I have on a black t-shirt and I'm wearing a gray cardigan sweater over it. Here on the slide is a picture of me and my family. And my family is truly my why for my passion for early childhood and my passion for inclusion. I am a research associate professor at the University of Denver. I've also been a childcare administrator. I've been a provider myself in classrooms and in childcare environments. Even in homes, I was an early intervention provider for a while as well. I'm a fierce advocate of inclusion and belonging, and that's because I'm a mom. I'm a mom to two young daughters myself. My older daughter, Juniper, is 6 years old, and she happens to have a rare genetic syndrome. And we've partnered with her team since the time she was born to include her in her communities and in early care and education spaces in a meaningful way so that she knows just how much value she brings to the spaces that she's in. And I have another young daughter named Goldie, who's 4 years old, and she's non-disabled. I'm a continuous learner. I believe that you are too. I am excited to read all of your thoughts and to learn and grow with you throughout this conversation today. And I mess up a lot. And I think that's part of learning as well. Our family, I do want to let you know, celebrates disability as diversity. My work is my love letter to June and to Goldie. And it is a really critical value of mine, as it is for our field, that we center our work. And as we kind of talk about these isolated topics like routines and inclusion, we're maintaining that lens of intersectionality because equity and the intersectional identities that young children and families and providers in our workforce have are incredibly important to remember, even as we talk about practices that we may implement with and by children and families in the classroom. And so racism and ableism are two systems that I am always aware of and thinking about how they're influencing the things that we do and what we know and how we can relearn different things. And the primary connection I want to make to that right now is that I do my best to use anti-ableist and anti-racist language. So you'll hear me work within person-first language and identity-first language. And I do try to, I'm relearning as much as possible, use identity-first language, such as disabled individuals or disabled children, because that's what many um, disabled individuals are letting us know is their preference, because disability is an identity that we should be celebrating. So I will get us moving into the content now. So my plan for today is hopefully that we get to talk about why consistent routines are so essential for creating secure and engaging early care and learning environments for every child. Also, to discover strategies that we can use to design routines that can include and support every child. And I would love for us to also explore considerations for teams when creating and maintaining inclusive, predictable routines. Some of the resources today that have helped inform my thinking and use of predictable routines within early care and education environments you see on this screen. Many of the resources, and we'll link those that are available for you in the chat during this presentation, or I can link them, are available through the National Center for Pyramid Model Innovations and also through STEMI. My personal application of this topic is through the 3 years that I spent as a childcare administrator at an inclusive preschool, an inclusive childcare center called the Rise School of Denver. And then also, I think I rely very heavily on the UDL guidelines, the 3.0 version that just came out in July 2024, and then other readings by both disabled individuals and also that just help us rethink what we know or think about disability and special education and belonging of individuals with disabilities, and especially with intellectual disabilities. So as we get started, before we launch into this topic of routines, I'd love for you to take a moment and think about your morning routine. Maybe your coffee ritual, or what you do before a morning workout if you do that. What preparations or little reminders or other small details make that morning routine work for you? And now think about what kind of things get in the way of your morning routine. And when those things get in the way of your morning routine, when your morning routine doesn't go as you planned or as you're used to it going, how does that impact the rest of your day? If you'd like to, you can share a few comments, maybe about your routine or what works or doesn't for you, or maybe a story about, have you ever read the book Alexander's No Good, Very Bad Day? Maybe a story like that about when your morning routine didn't go the way that you planned it to. My family would say that I am not a person who relies on routines very much, and that's probably correct. But when I know that I'm going to be stressed, or when I know I have to meet a certain timeline, or I know that I need to remember to do certain things or take particular things with me, I do lean more into routines. Because if I don't, then I forget things, or I become clumsy, or I will hit my elbow, my funny bone, because it's like I only hit that perfect spot when I have no time or patience for it to happen. Um, and those are the types of things that tend to happen when I don't lean into routines. And they just set me up for more stress or less confidence that it's going to be a good day, or whatever I'm getting to next is going to be as smooth and predictable and safe feeling as the way that I started my day, as an example. So my point here, though, is that when we stop and think about our own routines and our own morning routines, we really realize how important they are for us. And what we know is that just like adults, young children thrive with routines as well. So routines are kind of this universally loved practice. We can probably agree that different fields of work in early childhood don't necessarily see all of our lenses don't align 100% of the time, which is part of the beauty of our collaborative teaming and the multidisciplinary setup of our field. But what I found is that most people in our field really do see and view routines as such a fundamental practice or system, because they help young children feel safe and secure and they help them learn how to practice autonomy and build confidence and try new things. And routines also help young children develop social and emotional skills. And what we know about predictable routines is that they make inclusion happen. So, predictable routines, for many reasons, and the ones that I'll briefly overview right now are just some of the reasons, are, we believe at our center at the University of Denver, really important. They help with planning, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments as well. But understanding how the day is organized in a predictable but not rigid sequence of events helps us much more easily know when we can align children's learning goals with different times of the day or activities, or when we can embed individualized learning into routines. It also helps us think very, systematically and like more efficiently, if you will, about how we might want to set up the room or equipment or the structure of activities, because we understand what that time within the environment is going to progress like as well. It helps us create time and space to focus on individual strengths and needs of children, and then adapt materials and modify instruction within the familiar structure that children are used to as well. And it enhances collaborative teaming. I'll share a few more examples of that in a little bit, but it really helps adults know what the expectations are for children and also for themselves. And it enables us to kind of have the same language when we talk about routines or we talk about certain times of the day as collaborative teams, which allows us to really lean into our own expertise areas, which makes what we're able to do so much more powerful than if we were all really looking at maybe different times of the day or different scenarios as we tried to problem solve something. And then most of all, routines help improve provider well-being, especially for STEMI. And in my own work, I try to, as much as I can, not always make routines about classroom management. But what we do know is that routines help young children learn social and emotional skills. And they're also a great tool for reducing behaviors that might challenge providers in early care and education environments, which allows us to spend time building stronger relationships with children, because we're not kind of working to prevent or respond to behaviors. And then it also allows us to invest time in meaningful interactions. Routines help children and adults answer 4 important questions. And these 4 important questions are: what am I doing right now? Or what are my choices that are available for me right now? How can I tell I'm making progress? How will I know when I'm done? And what will I do next? So this visual right here, you see it says color, cut, tape, bin. So maybe there's some choices of activities at an art center during center time. And in order to promote children's autonomy and also be clear about what choices are for them within that center, there's a visual support that's created here that has a picture of a crayon box, a picture of scissors, a strip of tape so they know to use the tape, and then a picture of the bin where they can put the art activity once they're done with it. And so to get started with predictable routines, because of course we don't just want to talk about them, we want to know how to actually plan and use them in our own practice. You want to start with the big picture and plan around the key parts of your balanced daily schedule or your times of the day, right? So you want to start thinking about those times of the day: arrival time, group time, outside play time. And you want to think about that first and foremost in terms of balance. So we want to try to avoid the likelihood that children are sitting for many or long periods of time, or that there's multiple more adult directed routines or activities in a row. We want to balance activity level and adult directedness and child autonomy and child led choices as much as possible throughout the day. And then we take those predictable times of the day, and we create consistent routines from them. And we plan them with around the amount of just right structure and support. And in our work with teams and districts, we always encourage planning as universally as possible to maximize opportunities for engagement with every child in mind. So instead of always jumping to the most individualized support that we can offer, really thinking through adaptations, modifications, and if there is an individualized support, is there an opportunity to make that individualized support a choice for everyone in the environment? So a very simple example could be if a child benefits from the choice to use accessible scissors that maybe have a spring. Maybe we purchase options for all of the children who are in that area or every child in the classroom so that they can choose which scissors to use as well. And that individualized, quote, accommodation is planned universally so every child has access and the opportunity to benefit from it if that's their choice or what they need. And then we teach children routines. We teach children routines using visual schedules and supports and other multimodal strategies wherever we can. So there's many different opportunities and ways through which children can learn and understand information and then also show what they know. And then we continue to reflect on what's working, on what's not working. We collaborate with children and with families in our environments to decide what do we love about our routines and what do we want to keep or what do we want to do more of. And we really just continue to make them work for the people in our environments over time. So this is an example of how we would go about planning predictable routines. So you see here on the left, the activity column. And for this example and the example that I'll kind of use for the rest of this presentation, we'll talk about arrival. And so the routines within arrival are first we unpack, then we sign in, and then we choose a morning activity. And so as a team and with children whenever possible, and sometimes I would say unpack is more of like a procedure, just something that we kind of need to get done. And then other routines are more offer more opportunity to partner as a team and with children and with families to really be creative and make them as engaging as possible. But then we would think about the steps of what it would look like to unpack. We find our cubby, hang up backpack, put lunches in bin, water bottle in cart, right? So you see how we're thinking about that activity. What are those routines? And then what are the steps of the routine? For choosing a morning, or we'll go with sign in because I think there's an example for sign in coming here in a second. For sign in, we read the question of the day and then we answer the question, choose a sign in material, take the material to the sign in table, find our name, sign in, put it in the bin when we're done, and then find a friend and say, your turn to sign in. And of course, we're including accommodations, modifications, visual supports in all of these steps of the day. But this way of planning and thinking about the day helps children know what's, they've agreed to, and also adults, and it keeps us all being able to ask those 4 questions. So with that in mind, and thinking about those activities and routines and steps of the routines, I'd love to know in the chat one way that you've currently adapted a routine or maybe an activity or a material within the routine to support different ways of engaging. We like to organize the environment with routines because doing it in this way, and I'll have a few more comments on flexibility, and child-led as being a really strong value here still in a moment. But we like to organize or at least think about the day in this way because it really helps providers and teams design and plan around and create meaningful activities and learning opportunities and belonging with one another in inclusive environments. And so what you see on this slide here is how there's a fourth column, right? And that fourth column are notes or planning opportunities or considerations that the team wants to take as they're working throughout the year and continuously and intentionally observing and reflecting on what children are doing and how can we continue to, help and promote their engagement and their joyful learning and belonging in our environment. And so the routines offer this wonderful structure to plan for how to do that for adults. And so in this fourth column are just some examples of what a team might consider while they're planning and developing their routines. So if we look at sign in, for example, they might consider how to arrange the environment to promote progress to the next step. So maybe we'll put the sign-in materials right beside the sign-in table. So I can kind of visually see in my environment, okay, I've chosen my material, and now I go to the table, right? Or maybe there's an arrow that shows that or something even. Other things that they've considered are ensuring that their questions of the days have word and pictures. And because this is STEMIEFest, maybe they're embedding some question related to STEM or to some theme that they're focused on within the environment at that moment in time that relates to STEM. And then, multiple ways for children to read or think about the question, and then multiple ways for children to also answer it as well. And then there's another note here that says, let's partner with our occupational therapist to determine a range of materials that can be choices for every child that is responsive to every child's strengths and needs within the environment, and ensuring that we're programming any, communication needs or communication devices to ensure that children are able to communicate things with their friends, like your turn to sign in or answer the question in their preferred method of communication as they do that. And so here's an example on this next slide of what this might look like. And you see here on the left, sign in has choose materials, and then find the sign in with your name. And all of these are adapted to each child's individual progression of their writing skills. And sometimes this was at the Rise School of Denver where I worked. These little friends were children who I got to spend a lot of time with. So I always love to see them on my slides when I'm able to use pictures of them. But what you see is each child has their own unique sign-in. Some of it includes more tracing than others. Some of it might just include a dot where to start. Or if a child preferred maybe signing in a different way, finding their name and maybe matching it or doing it on an iPad or whatever's meaningful and fun and engaging for the child. And also we would determine that with our team and with the family, we would do. So there's lots of different ways of writing and signing in within this space. And the OT planned, this as well, because first everybody will warm up their hands and their fingers to get ready. And you can see how all of this is universally planned within this routine. So all of the children have the choice to warm up their hands if they'd like. They have choice of writing utensil. And so it's not, the other point here is it's not like additional individualized quote effort or focus to individualize instruction in this way. The differentiated instruction and adaptations and individualization are all planned within the natural routines of the day, which then enables the providers who are in the room to develop their relationships during this time or to offer, even more support or more intentional connection or learning opportunities, because the routines as part of the environment are acting as kind of another grown-up or teacher or practitioner in the space supporting children to answer those 4 questions. If you don't have team members like occupational therapists or speech and language pathologists in your program, perhaps children in your program have outside providers who you could partner with, or families are also a wealth of knowledge as team members as well for understanding children and what works best for them. And then there's also tons of great resources, available online. STEMI has amazing resources for adaptations and considerations, even like the one in this picture from a program that I had the opportunity to work at not too long ago. This is another example of how we might provide multiple ways for children to understand their routine during arrival. So you see here in this space, children were able to plan their choices of morning activities that they would want ahead of time, if that worked for them, and if they demonstrated that this type of support benefited them. And so you'll see here, this child chose to sign in and then complete tabletops. And then there's a visual support there that includes ideas for how children could use materials at that tabletop. I want to be really clear here that we didn't create these supports to prescribe how children must play with materials, but they are always available for them if they choose to use them. And oftentimes they are helpful for both disabled and non-disabled children in the environment. The little girl there in the pigtails that you see on the slide is actually my daughter Goldie, who again, I said is non-disabled, and she loves and always accesses the visual supports that are planned for her within her routines. And we always joke that she loves a routine. Some more examples are building helper opportunities into the caring community and opportunities for both or for every child in the space to help one another and care for one another. And you see visual supports here in the form of pictures and steps of the routine. So children can, again, more autonomously know how to progress through even the smaller routines and steps of the routines during the larger parts of their day. And the other important point to make here is that there's always an expectation that everyone helps and receives help, everyone teaches and learns, and everyone leads and follows in our caring community. For us, we did not set up environments where, non-disabled children were teaching or helping their friends with disabilities. It's really a mutual reciprocal value. We all have assets and we all have support needs. And that's really important when it comes to inclusion and belonging. Predictable routines also, to build on that idea of how they help us simplify planning, they free up time that offer us as providers more intentionality and creativity, which is really good for, well-being, and which is a really fun part of our job that oftentimes we don't get to do because we all have very limited time, and because oftentimes we spend that time doing things that don't really always feel creative or intentional. But when we structure our day this way, or even our planning forms in this way, it's much easier for us to engage in what we call routines-based planning. And routines-based planning helps us do things like avoid over-planning, because how many times have you spent so long creating this activity to run out of time or not be able to do it during the day? Or they help us prioritize planning for engagement and learning and play, because we can immediately go to the parts of the routines and the parts of the day and know when and how we want to update them, right? Maybe the week's changing or the theme's changing, or just as we're observing children and responding to what they're learning and interested in, in the environment. Planning in this way helps us immediately go to those opportunities to be as intentional and creative as possible. They also help us collaborate with our team, even asynchronously. Oftentimes, we didn't have time to collaborate as a team when I was working at Rise, and we would asynchronously collaborate on the routines document, and we could really quickly identify places, to further lean into a child's interest or offer an adaptation or less support when we were maybe offering too much support and things like that, because we just knew where to look, especially over time as we got more comfortable with the routines to be able to do that. They are great for family partnerships and asking families, how do you want to be involved? What are meaningful ways that you want to volunteer within our environment, for assessing and monitoring progress, because we can know when children are more likely to use certain skills. And so we can observe them in their natural routines with materials that they've already have had access to and engage in authentic assessment. And it also helps us integrate and embed individualized goals, children's learning goals, and also more individualized goals that children with disabilities often have around various, domains of development. So we do find and encourage routines for planning purposes as well. And I'm almost done, but I do want to make a few more points. And the way that we really encourage and partner with teams to think about routines and plan them is with this lens of always presuming the competence of every child in the environment. So when we presume competence, engagement and joyful learning require us to think beyond compliance and physical participation or only adult created expectations. The way that we and I invite you to, plan routines and plan days around them to promote engagement and joyful learning with this lens of presuming competence, it really helps us ensure that we're expecting and planning for and recognizing every child's cognitive engagement, as well as kind of what we tend to think about, maybe only motor or communicative engagement in a limited way. And it also helps us assume that each child is capable of complex thinking and meaningful contributions. So when we understand the day and we can collaboratively plan with children and with families, and we are doing that within this lens of presuming competence, we know that we are creating caring communities in which every child belongs. And we also know that that is important because belonging is a foundation for all of us to reach our full potential. And so as we collaborate, with states or programs or providers around belonging, we lean into routines because we really value that. And we also value belonging because we know that it really promotes children's inclusive engagement and joyful learning. And so this is the point that I promised you that I would make about routines aren't meant to be rigid. They're meant to be flexible and they're meant to be responsive to the young children who are in the environment. And so as we're planning routines, collaboratively, we want to also be thinking about where are our opportunities to encourage children's exploration through open-ended play and to explore materials in their own way and understand concepts at their own pace. And we want to offer choices as much as possible in materials and activities and locations and how we might sing a song or what song we might sing. And we want to plan for peer partnerships. Oftentimes, we'll have another kind of column on that routines structure, on that routines planning structure. Where are we going to have meaningful peer partnership opportunities throughout those routines as well? And we want to observe children and be responsive and remain flexible. If a routine is maybe not structured enough, we can always offer more structure while also thinking maybe there's too much structure here and the children in the space maybe don't need that much structure to more autonomously lead their own, learning and engagement within the space. And we also want to ensure that we're representing children's social identities. So we want to be ensuring that children's diverse social identities and with inclusion, especially disabilities, are thoughtfully included within our planning. And so going back to these two pictures we already looked at, you see that here we used the environment to further support the routine. And We also have choice in there where children can choose, which material to use to warm up or to sign in. And then maybe you'll take a moment for this picture on the right and think of what are some more opportunities that you could encourage, exploration or offer choice and embed representations of children's home cultures or languages, even within, you know, the visual supports or within the choices of activities that are planned for children. Another example of this that I came up with as I was watching STEMI videos, honestly, for another presentation that I'm doing is exploring ramps and understanding force and motion. So some ideas that I came up with in terms of representing disability identities, you could plan for, including Fisher Price people who might go up and down the ramps while they're understanding force and motion, or like baby doll sized walkers. Maybe you could extend these concepts of ramps into literacy, and you could talk about different family structures or how people move around in their communities and their environments. Maybe you'd find a developmentally appropriate way to talk about the curb cut, which is a ramp that gives everyone access um, to sidewalks and things like that. But the point here is to genuinely know children and be flexible and responsive to their whole selves, including to their home lives within our environments. And predictable routines aren't just for kids. So we would create coaching routines, routines for observation, routines for planning meetings, because again, just helping us maximize the value of our limited time that we have. We would create collaborative teaming routines. So we knew kind of steps to follow when we had to have a hard conversation or even request one. Or we knew that if we said we need to problem solve this, what our problem solving steps were, or what our decision making steps were. And here, I want to point out, if you notice, even in this just kind of meeting agenda example, that our discussions oftentimes centered around routines instead of individual children. So we moved away. Of course, we talked about individual children often, and when we needed to, and we found ourselves many times once we were planning within the context of routines, talking about routines, what's working, what's not working, how can we more universally embed supports that children would benefit from, how can we make this more child-led or promote joyful learning more, how can we think more creatively about engagement. And many of those answers came back to, creating spaces and environments of belonging with and by children and families. And so as I end, I'd love for you to take a moment and maybe think about a recent situation when you were worried that a child wasn't engaged. Maybe there's an activity or you were hoping that they could learn and explore a particular concept and you had planned an adaptation or a support, but maybe you noticed that they weren't as engaged as you would like them to be. How could any of the ideas from today that I just and I admit probably rapidly talked about, how might any of those ideas support that child's inclusive engagement, joyful learning, and belonging within your environment? And I invite you to think of one specific action that you can commit to taking within the next week to integrate into your work. I would love for you to share it in the chat or for you to tell us about it in a moment. But if not, maybe document it in a way that is meaningful and accessible to you. My colleague always says, text it to your mom, right? Or your friend or your partner. So thank you so much. And I'm really excited for what is coming next, which is our collaboration around this topic.